afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's session on structuring the scalable firm brought to you by Axos. My name is Nirmal. I'm with the Axos team. Axos is a provider of robust business process outsourcing solution for small, medium enterprises, accounting, and financial services industry for over 17 years. A firm's capacity problem isn't always about your team. It's often about systems. To deliver on that, we have our wonderful host from Clarity Street. We have with us Amy Holdsworth, CEO of Clarity Street. Clarity Street is a firm that helps businesses navigate complexity with tailored growth strategies. Unfortunately, Jack won't be able to attend today's session due to a medical emergency. Jack is okay. Amy, over to you. We'll pick it from there.
Thank you so much, Noel. I really appreciate it. And it's great to see so many of us joining today. Thank you very much. Appreciate you all giving up your time. I'm very hopeful that you guys can all see my screen. Feel free to chuck a message in the chat. And also, please keep the chat active. Like, I'm really open to, I will per se woman the chat, but ask your questions along the way as well. It's always good to have people keeping it a bit of active and things like that. Yes, our apologies. Unfortunately, Jack was called away to a medical emergency, so he's okay, but he just won't be able to present with me today. So sorry, you're stuck with me today, and I hope that that's okay. But I really do appreciate you guys giving up your lunchtime. I hope that you are grabbing a bite to eat, though. Today, I am talking to you about structuring the scalable firm. So in terms of your workflow, so that you can actually offshore successfully, all right? So some of you are obviously already clients of Axos. Some of you might be considering your options around outsourcing. And I think the same rules still apply regardless of, in relation to making sure that whether your team are located, in your office and you can physically see them, versus are they in a different location? Are they offshore? Are they still onshore, but, not in your office? Whichever way it goes, everything that I'm going to present to you today, same rules apply effectively. Okay. So as I say, keep the chat active. It would be really great. But otherwise, let's kick things off. Before we, begin, let's talk about who am I? I am an ex-practice manager. I have been implementing accounting tech for the last 15 plus years. I own and run Clarity Street. So we are, it's a cloud integration business, which I'll go through a little bit more in a moment, but I've been running Clarity Street coming up to 10 years now. I am also a podcast co-host, so a bit of a shameless plug there. If anyone's loves to listen to podcasts, jump onto the All Aussie Accounting Adventures Tech Edition. And in my spare time, when I'm not doing that, I have a little side hustle, which is a cake decoration business. Feel free to follow me on Instagram as well. So a little bit about why we're here, though. We are here because, even firms that seem to have that seem to be well run, they often struggle with hidden workflow inefficiencies. And these are particularly prevalent in relation to adopting, as I say, offshore teams. If you don't have workflow efficiency, you are going to struggle with getting the most out of your team that is not located within, the realms of your office space, basically. There's lots of drag, there's lots of rework, there's lots of misfires, and these become normalized and they tend to go unchallenged in a lot of firms. So we're here to unpack a few of those more than anything. We're going to look at the structural blockers, and the legacy assumptions that are, baked into everyday processes. One of my favorite questions that I have conversations with clients is, or one of the favorite things I like to ask them is, why? Why are you doing that? And if they can't give you a genuine reason, or if you get that because we've always done it that way, that's usually a good opportunity to consider whether it's still relevant for you. We're also going to look at, how they, create that, they create persistent friction. That's, and it makes it feel so much harder than it should. So that's why we're here, is to help you unblock all of these things so that you can actually structure, as I say, a scalable workflow so that you can have a successful offshore team. A little bit about who Clarity Street is, though. We're a cloud-based business. We design and deliver dynamic, tailored, best practice infrastructures for accounting firms. But what does that actually mean? We spend a hell of a lot of time doing projects and consulting work for our clients. We look at a lot of their tech, their processes, their procedures. We get firms that come to us in relation to their current tech stack. It might need updating. One of the applications might need updating. All of the applications might need updating. They might be still on a server-based infrastructure, and they might want to move to a cloud-based infrastructure. They also might already have current tech, but it's just not being used correctly. It might need to be optimized. You might have implemented it, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, and you haven't really done anything different since you adopted it 4 or 5 years ago. And tech evolves, tech changes, but have you evolved and have you changed with that tech? So we spend the bulk of our time with accounting practices, doing lots of projects and consulting to them to get the best out of their internal operational infrastructure from a tech, a process, and a people perspective. We have built Clarity Campus, and Clarity Campus is our self-paced online learning application, and that gives you access to all the tools there about how to use all the apps. There's self-paced learning online coursework. There is a massive knowledge base of articles. There's over 1,000 different articles in there about processes and procedures. I think there's about 20 on just how to do a whip wash up and the many different ways of doing that and all the different functions of that within XPM and then FYI and then all the other apps as well. So that's what Clarity Campus is all about. And then Project 95 is our operational coaching service that we have designed for all of our practice managers out there. And not just practice managers, but our admin and anyone who performs a support or operations role within an accounting practice. This is for you. Project 95 is a bit of a brain baby of mine. There's everything that's out there in the marketplace at the moment is dedicated to accountants and business owners, but there's nothing that's really out there for, in my opinion, the most important people in the firm, which is your ops team, your admin team members, your practice managers. So it is small group coaching, monthly catch-ups, monthly accountability and reporting, and it's all there to design to support those people that as I say, they are the glue of your business, and they help things tick along within your practice. So that's what Project 95 is about. Anyway, that's enough about what a few little services that Clarity Street does. If anybody's interested, obviously you can reach out to us post this. What we're going to be discussing today, though, is we're going to be talking about the perfect client life cycle. Because the perfect client life cycle is all about getting the most out of what you're currently doing in terms of your processes and procedures. If you have things done in the right order of events, that's where you're going to get the most efficiency, which is going to mean that slotting in team members wherever they are located is going to be a hell of a lot easier if everybody understands what the client life cycle is actually going to be about. We will obviously be talking about, unpacking that process in totality. We'll talk about some internal expectations and accountability for team members because this plays a massive role as well. And then we're going to talk to you about your technology and how to possibly choose the correct tech. It was something that Nermal mentioned to me just before we jumped on the call. He's like, I said, is there anything you want me to cover off? He goes, yeah, I'd really like to unpack, how firms can choose the right tech. And I was like, right, okay, hang on. I just need to add some extra slides into the slide deck. So with 3 minutes to spare, you've got some extra content today. Huzzah. I will hopefully only go for about 45 minutes. Give or take, but if there's questions along the way, as I say, please chuck them in the chat and I will answer them for you. But otherwise, let's talk about the perfect client life cycle. All right, so for some of you on this call, this might resonate a little bit with you. It's the traditional internal workflow process. Okay, so a client contacts you to get their work done. You start the job and you get halfway through and you have some queries. So you contact those clients to get answers. And then you wait. Multiple emails and calls backwards and forwards. You pick up the job, you put down the job. You move on to another job, you forget about the queries. The client finally comes back to you, so you pick the job up again. You continue working. You ask additional queries. You put the job down. The client comes back, so you pick the job up again, and then you actually finally complete the job. You will probably look at the whip and cry a little bit. Right time off and adjust it. you'll look at the bill from last year, and regardless of the WIP position for this year's job, you will usually raise an invoice with a 3 to 5% increase from last year's invoice. You'll send the work to the client for signing. You'll wait for the client to sign. You'll wait for the invoice to be paid, and then you continue to wait for both until you actually finally get it completed. Now, the average WIP lockup day in the industry is 90 to 120 days. And I'm not suggesting that this is true and correct for your firm or for every job in your firm. This is just an average across the industry. I would love to know in the chat if this resonates with anyone. I'd really love to understand if it does. Feel free to chuck it in there. I'd love to know if you're actually still, if this is what your current process actually is. Nice to see you, Jen. Thanks for jumping in. All right. What we hope to, and Nick, also nice to jump in. Thank you, guys. Great to see some friendly faces on here, actually. How are you all? Okay, so this is what we would suggest alternatively. All right. Because that old way, this actually going back to this one, this old way, this promotes inefficiency, quite literally promotes inefficiency. All right. So what we're trying to achieve here is a much more efficient way of doing things. So how do we make this more efficient? And it's all about just changing the order of events. All right. So step one, view and complete a work schedule and have a meeting. So our preference is 6 weeks in advance. You are looking at your work schedule and actually going, right, what work do we need to call in proactively as opposed to reactively waiting for your clients to contact you. We are at the end of October. Can't believe it's already the end of October. But at the moment, what you guys should be starting to think about is calling in work for December. But in actual fact, given that we know that half of your, like most of your clients, their brains are going to switch off around mid-December, I would be starting to think about all the work that you need to cover and call in for not just December, but January as well. And maybe even consider starting to call in the work that you would typically do in February, just so it's in the office ready to go. However, in a standard approach, 6 weeks in advance, let's look at your work schedule. Good old-fashioned lodgement program. All right. Once you've looked at that, over to the admin team to contact that client for information. Follow up until all of that work arrives in the office. Keep chasing until it arrives in the office. Once it arrives in the office, over to the accountants to scope that work. What did we do last year? How much time did we spend? How much did we invoice the client? And most importantly, if I wanted to start this job right now and get it to review stage 1, what's stopping me from achieving that? What's missing? At that point, back to the admin team to chase up for that relevant information that we still require. And once they've got that, I want them to create a proposal and send it to the client with what's outlined, what service we're providing, and what we're providing to the client as well. So what we're going to be charging the client. With the recent changes, thank you, Tessa, you should be doing this for every piece of work moving forward now in reality, at least annually as a side note. But once you've sent that proposal and the proposal is accepted, now here's the kicker. We strongly encourage you to not just send a proposal with the services that you're going to be providing to the client and the fee you're going to be charging the client, but we strongly encourage you to also turn payments on and where possible, take payment up front. Because off the back of an accepted proposal, if you've done all of that, there should be no reason why you can't get that work done in a 14 to 28 day turnaround for standard compliance work. Because if you've chased for all the relevant information, if the client's provided it to you and you've made sure it's all there and you've taken payment up front, there's a bit of a psychological shift that happens. The clients have paid, so the accountant goes, oh gosh, better get that work done in a more timely manner because there's a bit more pressure associated with it. Equally, the client will have an expectation that the work will be done in a more timely manner. But if the client drags their heels at query stage, well, then you've been paid and you're not now doing work for free, basically, and chasing them for all the answers, okay? So there's a psychological shift that happens with that. And we know that it won't work for every single client, and that's okay. But for a large proportion of your clients, this process definitely can work because beyond that, nothing else changes. Queries get answered, work gets reviewed, documents are prepared for signing, and then you either have a meeting to present the work to the client, or you email that work to the client for signature. On the right-hand side of this screen, I'd like to highlight who does what in this whole process. I'd also like to highlight for all of those directors that are on this call, how frequently your name appears on this little list on the right-hand side. Because at the moment, it's really only at the end of the job. Now, the reality of that is not 100% true and correct. Ultimately, there are going to be certain touch points that, the partners or the directors will need to have. For example, you may need to review, you might need to, get the accountant to scope it, and then you might need to review that. Just, the accountant might come to you and go, hey, this is what I reckon based on last year. Do you agree? Sure. Add your 2 cents in at that point. The admin team might prepare the proposal and they might say, hey, boss, can you just check that for me? I prepared it. Just make sure that you're happy with it. Great. Eyeball it then. Queries and or reviewing work that you may still be reviewing work. I appreciate that. That makes complete sense. But they should be minimal touch points along the way. Should be the accountants or the admin team members doing this process. All right. That goes to the same point when you're actually using an offshore model, because this is where your offshore team can also slot in at the relevant touch points as well. Whether they are onshore or offshore, it makes sense to actually look at who is doing what. But also I want to highlight that it is very reliant on everybody pulling their weight. If the accountant doesn't look at the schedule, then how will the admin team know what to call in proactively? And if the admin team doesn't follow up on that work, well, then how can the accountant scope the work once it arrives in the office? And if the accountant doesn't scope the work, then how can the proposal be done? And so on and so forth. You get where I'm going with this, okay? We often get questions around this when we present this to people and they're like, oh, I can't charge up front for this work. There's no way. And or, what if, there's no way. 14-day turnaround period. That's an internal guideline, 14 to 28 days. You can still tell your client that it's going to be a 6-week turnaround time, even if you are taking payment up front. It's all about setting the right expectations for clients. All right. And in terms of taking payment up front, we strongly encourage it. Whether you do or not, that's your decision at the end of the day. Ultimately, it's your business, your rules. But I can tell you that for the firms that have adopted this methodology, the efficiency gains that they get, work moves through that process so much quicker because there's money being exchanged, right? I'd love to know if anybody has any concerns or anything around that process in the chat. Whilst I go through the next steps, which is I'm just going to briefly highlight to you. I'll hold on this screen if you feel the need, if you would like to actually take a screenshot of this. These are the steps that I've just talked through in relation to all of the work. It's a really good point, Jenny, in relation to we generally do 70% up front. That's cool. And there are some firms that would also still do as in 70% of your client base is up front, which I love. And then you've got your clients that are on a fixed fee model, like they might be on a fixed price agreement, monthly retainer style as well. And then you've got firms that like to do the 50% upfront, 50% on completion for each proposal engagement type scenario, which I think is a good option. But a better option is just to do 100%, because ultimately by doing the 50 upfront, 50 on completion, you're actually creating more admin work. Just so you know, for your admin team, there's more steps involved because they effectively have to raise 2 invoices, and there's 2 steps to the process rather than just being 1. So keep that in the back of your mind. Is every different delineated way of you billing a client. That's every different way that your admin team needs to remember what they need to do for that particular client and that subset of clients, okay? So the more consistent you can get it, the better it will be. In relation to what we just talked about, view and complete a work schedule, we recommend you having fortnightly meetings. And these aren't WIP meetings. These aren't, your current what's in the office. This is what we're going to be calling into the office. So it's kind of a little column A, little column B. It's part WIP meeting, but actually more work scheduling meeting as well. Because you obviously have to understand what's in the office to be able to schedule it in accordingly as well. But it needs to keep momentum there, basically, all right? So there's actually a bit of a structure in there as to who does what and what we actually recommend in relation to that. Really good point, Andrew, in relation to the blend, monthly, quarterly, 50% upfront, 50 on completion. I understand why you do that. As I say, I do encourage you with the 50 upfront, 50 on completion is to consider whether that's a necessity. And the reason why I'm saying that is it's still an additional manual step for your admin team to obviously go through that process of triggering it, even with the details of, being with that information being captured with the payment information. So you've got your view and complete work schedule, you've got your contact the client for info, you've got your follow-up until the work arrives in the office. And I've held that there just so in case you do want to take a screenshot, you can go back and read that. In relation to the next steps of the scoping and preparing proposals, the accountant needs to scope that work. It should be 10 to 20 minutes max. I mean, you already do it at the moment. Most firms already scope the work. It's just that they don't stop after they've scoped it. They scope it and then they continue doing. And that's when they go, oh, okay, I've scoped it. Yep, I know what's missing. I'll just keep going and I'll send the client some information. That's when the pick up, put down thing happens. So our recommendation is to scope it and then stop over to the admin team to prepare that proposal. Again, there's the steps associated with prepare the proposal acceptance and then beginning and manage that work around what happens next. So the accountant changes the job state in XPM from accepted to in progress, for example, once the job actually triggers to be started. We do encourage, and we'll go through this a little bit more, 14 to 28 days, as I mentioned, and then it's up to the client service coordinator or the admin team to manage the job manager, ensuring that job states are correct and due dates are obviously up to date as well. The final steps in this process are more in relation to the accountants, queries and reviewing work. Queries is an interesting one. Do you get the admin team or the accountant to manage the queries? My recommendation would be that, well done, Darren, you get gold stars, by the way. Good to see you as well in relation to the 100% upfront. Very happy to hear that. Sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit as I'm reading your chat comments. Queries is an interesting one. My recommendation would be that the accountant prepares the list of queries that the client, that they want the client to answer, that they copy in the admin team member. They might send the initial email to the client, but because the admin team member is copied in on it, then the admin team can then chase the client as and when they need to like poke and prod until they get all the answers to the queries, so that the accountant kind of doesn't have to do that admin task, because it is something that the admin team can obviously chase up until the relevant information and queries are answered. You could also throw in some tech associated with queries as well, which would be good. There's lots of apps out there that can help with that, Content Snare being one of them, Seamless being another one to assist with those queries. You can also use your workpaper products for those that are using Xero workpapers. The current Xero workpapers can actually do queries, and the new one will be much better at doing and handling queries. I know that Active Workpapers by Business Fitness also can help manage those queries as well. So depending on what you want to do from that perspective. Preparing documents for review work. Obviously, this is a decision between, it depends on what your internal structure is. So if you've got an offshore team in relation to this, you might have different levels of query or review points. So you might have a more junior accountant offshore doing the work. You might have a senior accountant offshore that's reviewing their work. You then might have an onshore accountant reviewing the offshore team's work. It depends on what your structure is as to what review will work. The aim of the game, though, is where possible, is that the more senior you are onshore, the less review points you are doing, and you are literally just eyeballing it, though. You want your offshore team to be doing as much as the heavy lifting as possible. That's the point of you having them involved in your business, is that they can be doing as much of that heavy lifting, okay? Once it's all being reviewed, though, obviously back to the admin team to prepare the documents for signing and send that off to the client. And then back to, having a meeting with the client, depending on what the work is and how much the client might be paying you, will dictate whether you have a meeting with them or you are just emailing that work off for signature, basically for an electronic signature. So feel free to take some screenshots of those if you think that they will be relevant. Some of the other things that we're going to talk about is around setting some internal expectations and some accountability, okay? So when it comes to setting some internal expectations and accountability, most of the issues where things fall down is when the more senior you are, the more that you just have an expectation without setting the accountability, is that you just kind of assume that people get what they should be doing without you actually going, oh, I should tell them what they should be doing. It's just one of those things. I still do it. I struggle with it. Sometimes you're like, yeah, surely you're in my brain. You just know this stuff, don't you? Of course you do. No, apparently they don't always know this. So some things that we would encourage you to possibly adopt around workflow expectations, and this should be across the board, right? As I said, these are your internal expectations. You don't necessarily need to let your clients know this. You could let your clients know that for every single piece of work that you do, there's hypothetically a 6-week turnaround. ASIC being the exception on that one for obvious reasons, and maybe corporate establishments. But these are some good guidelines that we would encourage you to potentially adopt around turnaround time. So ASIC county reviews, from an internal perspective, they should be a 5-minute job. So therefore a 1-day turnaround as and when, the anniversary of that obviously occurs. Corporate establishments, a week. Should be no reason why it takes any longer than that. Activity statements, ITRs, TPAR, work cover, 2-week turnaround. Group year-end compliance, 4 weeks. And for SMSF compliance, and I would encourage you to include the audit in that, maybe a 6-week turnaround time, and same as tax planning, possibly a 6-week turnaround time as well. As I mentioned though, just to reiterate, you don't need to let your clients know what those turnaround times are. These are your internal expectations that you're setting. There's nothing better than setting an expectation with a client for 6 weeks and then getting it done in 2 or 4 weeks and the client going, oh, that's done quicker than I thought. Like, yeah, see, good like that. So you can structure it that way. From a job state turnaround, something else that we also encourage here is how to obviously structure your work around things would be job states. And this is how you're going to get some efficiencies when it comes to your workflow. Whether you're using XPM, FYI, Carbon, any of the account kit, any of the multitude of different options for managing workflow in your office, having clear delineated job states will make the workflow process hum a hell of a lot better. So having a look at these are what we would recommend as some of your best practice job states. Pre-work for scoping, as we say, used predominantly when the client first engages with the firm to undertake a job. Now, there's a bit of a bone of contention here. If you are using Ignition as part of your process, and there would be some firms that are using Ignition as part of this process, sometimes having this job, setting up a job before you send out the proposal to the client, it depends on how anally retentive you want to get with capturing timesheet entries. So some firms like to capture every moment in time. So that would mean that if you are, pre-scoping, so doing pre-work and or scoping, that, the accountants want to have a job sitting there so that they can put their timesheets there. Therefore, you may need to set up a job before you would do the proposal and before you would trigger a job to deploy off the back of an accepted proposal. Chicken and egg issue here. Sorry, people. It's just a thing. There's no right or wrong answer here. There's a trade-off with whichever way you handle this. Do you set up a job first or do you not? Do you put your timesheet to an ad hoc job? Please don't use ad hoc jobs. That's the worst one out of the lot of these. Or do you set up a different job state in your internal time and then you can move the time accordingly? There's no perfect solution with this if you're going to capture the time for your pre-scoping work, okay? So it's your call as to how you manage that, but having that state is sometimes quite helpful. The accepted state would be off the back of if you are using something like Ignition to trigger jobs, that's what state the job lands in XPM, and it would be the accepted state. Okay. The reason why we recommend doing that is so that we know that the job's sitting there ready to go, but in actual fact, it may not have been picked up yet by one of the accountants. The in progress state should be once the accountant has actually started working on the job, they've picked it up, all the documents have been received, we're now working on this job. Queries, internal or external, this is just literally we're waiting for someone internal to help us, and or external, we're waiting on the client. You could have, when it comes to the queries, you could also have an additional one if you're working with an offshore team. And same as for the review, you might have an internal review stage. So it might be that the job is sitting there with the offshore team and it's being reviewed from an offshore perspective. And or you might have, so you might actually separate out those review stages a little bit more. It's entirely up to you how you want to manage that. Just remember, there should be a logical order, a sequence of events. There should be a flow to your job states. So once you've ticked off one, it goes to the next one. Some of these you may not use. For example, the queries. You might not use the queries depending on the client, on the type of work that you actually are doing, for example. Same as the hold pending other group jobs. You might have, we are a big fan of using workflow jobs or recommending that you use workflow jobs at Clarity Street. So we actually think that for each piece of work that you do, there should be a job. Again, if there is a trade-off to that, pros and cons to both. Do you have one job with with all the pieces of work as a task? Or do you have multiple jobs and therefore each job becomes a workflow job? There is a trade-off for both. There's no necessarily right or wrong, but I will tell you that the clients that come to us who have no visibility over workflow, 99.9% of the time, they have no workflow visibility because they've set up one job that's open for the entire year and each piece of work sits there as a task under that particular one job. So if that gives you an indication, our preference is multiple jobs, generally speaking, and that would mean that you might have gotten some jobs done within that group. So we'll have it on hold whilst we get the other jobs as part of that group done. For invoicing, packaging means that we're pretty much done from the accounting side. It's back over to the admin team, which means that they've either triggered the final invoice or the invoicing has been done if they've done it up front. Therefore, we're just packaging this up, ready to be sent to the client. We've sent it off to the client now. We're now going to perform the WIP wash up. Once it's been washed up, the WIP has been done. Everything has effectively been done for them from the client's perspective. The only thing that may not have been done is lodgement, and that is, again, dictated by when you are going to be lodging that. But that's at the point where you would actually be completing that job. Nothing further should be done on a completed job. Can't stress that enough to you guys. We often get clients who a team member might put timesheets down on a completed job because they don't know where else to do it. They don't know where else to put the time down. Make that a big no-no in your firm, please. Completed means completed, basically. And then the only other one is an annual agreement or a billing only job. For those that are using Ignition and have their clients on, call it a fixed price agreement, you would know that you can only send an invoice to one job within the XPM structure. Therefore, you need to obviously send those jobs to that one job, and that's the reason why that job is sitting there. It might be open for the entire year. For those firms that aren't using the software that I've kind of been referring to and referencing along the way, there are different ways of handling this, but it's still... there's no difference. You can still use this structure for, using other apps out there in the marketplace. All right. It's still a logical sequence of events to manage your workflow. So let's now talk about apps. If we're now talking about a logical sequence of events from a workflow perspective, this is but one way that you could structure your workflow. Okay, so just so we're really clear on this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to structure it this way. This is just a way of structuring your workflow, right? So XPM is there to manage your job deployment, etc. It deploys jobs, it manages your clients, your WIP, and monitors your KPIs, obviously, as well in XPM. That obviously connects through to FYI. So that's where you could also manage your workflow because it's intrinsically linked to your XPM module. But it's also where you could then get quite granular with tasks, with document management, with email management, and also entering time in FYI as well. Or you could enter time in XPM. Again, they're linked from that perspective. In terms of requesting documents from clients, whether that's for brand new work or at the query stage, Content Snare is a fabulous piece of software that can assist and support you in that process. over to Ignition in this whole thing. So you could start the job in XPM, which would link through to FYI to gather source docs, content snare for further information for the actual source documents. Once we've eyeballed that, we then prepare the proposal in Ignition. Client accepts that proposal, and it then obviously links back to XPM, FYI, and Xero. So what you're seeing here is lots of apps used in a different sequence and events, and they can obviously be ordered in different ways as well, depending on what your client lifecycle and flow is. What's important to highlight here more than anything is it's not necessarily about what's right and wrong within the order of your apps and, you know, what you've actually got going on here with your tech stack. It's more to understand what does what and what part of the process the app is used. This comes back to understanding where your offshore team fits into this as well. If you don't know where your apps sit in your client lifecycle, if actually, let's bring this back even more to the beginning. What is your client lifecycle? Who's doing what in terms of your client lifecycle? Where do your apps sit in terms of your client lifecycle? Back to who's doing what in relation to those apps within your client lifecycle. It all comes back down to understanding what is actually happening within terms of your client lifecycle, which then dictates where your offshore team sits and how you can scale your business effectively and successfully to work with all the different client work that you actually have. I'm hoping that the silence is more, you guys are sitting there going, yep, got it, understood. But feel free if I've said anything on this and you're like, I don't understand what she's talking about, chuck it in the chat. I'm happy to try and answer it for you. The next slide that I'm going to show you is what Clarity Street is quite well known for, which is our Cloud Firm app stack. This sits under... Oh, good question, Jenny. I will come back to that for you. This, our Cloud Firm app stack, the way that we have delineated where the apps actually sit underneath these is we've kind of structured them based on, call it a business function within your business. So document management, engagement and invoicing, practice management, accounting and tax. You've got your AI and automation down the bottom. You've got your accounting compliance. I need to highlight a few things about this. This is our visual representation of where we believe the apps sit in the best possible way. Originally, when we created this back in 2018, and by the way, it's getting a facelift at Christmas, just so you're aware, so watch this space. But I mean like a proper facelift. When we created this many moons ago, most of the apps just kind of did one thing, like FYI was just document management. FYI is now document management plus practice management plus workflow management. So there's lots of crossover, okay? Account Kit was only ever accounting tools. They now do workflow and semi-practice management. So I appreciate that there are apps here that do different things and have different function and could possibly sit in different spaces. But we've had to keep them into one place or where they do the main thing, because otherwise it just gets really messy. And as it is, it's kind of overwhelming to look at the moment. I need to let you know that you don't need every single app on this app stack. And in actual fact, if you have every app on this app stack, I would be a little bit concerned and worried for you. I'm hoping that you don't. Okay. A good example of that is under the legal and corporate. You don't need Now Infinity and CAS 360. Just pick one. Whatever your preference is. Same as you probably don't need under the self-managed super fund, simple fund and class. Again, just pick one. In terms of engagement and client onboarding tools, Jenny, you've raised a good question, which is what's the difference between Content Snare and Seamless? Today, as it stands, very little difference if I'm being completely transparent. They both assist in the onboarding of brand new clients. They both push to XPM in terms of if you gather data from a client, they will both push that information into XPM. They will both push source documentation into FYI. They will both do ID verifications. The only things that they don't do that is a bit different, Seamless now has a bit of a lead generation, like a deal board. So if you're wanting to manage, so if anybody ever used, I know Ignition does, they have now deals as well. And if anybody ever used the original XPM lead manager, it's kind of similar to the lead manager process through that. That'd probably be the major difference. And then I would actually say the other difference that I looking at would be the user interface is obviously a little bit different. Personal preference, if you asked every member at Clarity Street their personal preference as to which one that they preferred, we're all split straight up. Seamless is designed by an accounting practice. So it has all the bells and whistles and everything that you need. Is it as intuitive as what I would like to think it is? No, I don't think it's as intuitive as what Content Snare is. Content Snare wasn't designed by an accountant. It was designed by a developer, which means it's probably a little bit more intuitive. However, it is, in all honesty, it is very much a what is your personal preference now? Because I do wholeheartedly believe that both of them are, we're now at the comparing apples with apples kind of, in terms of those apps. Similar to Kaz and now Infinity, I think it's an apples and apples, like, what is your personal preference with the way that the app feels and functions? Because both of them have got really good, strong functionality in them, basically. So thanks for asking that question. So in terms of what you're looking at now, I think where this comes down to and how do you actually choose what is the right app for you? Obviously, that's what Clarity Street does. We can help you with helping select that. We can help you select what apps are the right apps for you based on what your needs are, based on where you're at. Just to go back to the Seamless and the Content Snare one, Seamless was originally designed for onboarding. So I would suggest that if you are going through a really high growth state or high growth phase within your business and you're bringing on a lot of new clients, I would say that Seamless is probably more of a better fit. Just based on the way that it is structured and how it integrates and how it pushes and pulls and things like that. But if you are a bit more stable and you're now just wanting to really improve, I guess, the client experience with how you request information for source documentation, things like that, potentially Content Snare might be a better fit for you. That's what we do in terms of helping clients identify what is the best fit app for your business. So you don't need every single app on this. The reason why this app stack did come about is because they all have open APIs and they connect in with the apps that are in some way, shape or form with the apps that are in the middle of this screen. No one pays us to feature on this, just so you're aware. We have loads of apps in the ecosystem wanting to be part of this app stack and wanting to be featured, and I don't let them on. Because until I have a very good understanding of how they work, how they operate, what problem they solve, and have some really good feedback from some of our clients or people that we know that have used it and they're getting a really good uptake on it, that's when we allow them to be on the app stack, because I don't want you guys to waste your time with using apps that are promising functions and promising features in future. I want to know that the functions and the features that are currently, available to you in all of the apps are actually solving a good problem for you, because they should be there to make your lives more efficient and more structured and more feature rich more than anything. Okay, so for example, there's some apps in the engagement space at the moment that are there, the likes of onboardme.io, and then there's also, oh, it's going to annoy me, it's a UK one, I will come back to that. Socket, got it. Socket is another one in that space, and in actual fact, in terms of like the job deployment and those kinds of things, Seamless actually does job deployment now. Or hang on, maybe is it there or is it in beta? It's close. It's actually, I've seen the function though. I guess where I'm going with this is the reason why Socket and OnboardMe at the moment don't appear on the app stack is because I want more use cases. I want more clients that have been using it to know that it really, it does what it says on the box, those kinds of things, right? So that's how people get onto that app stack. But just so you're all aware, you definitely do not need every single app in the ecosystem is more where I was going with this. If anybody does need some help though, we are here to help you help that. The only other thing that I wanted to highlight is this little app stack here. These apps here are probably what we would classify as our preferred apps that we tend to typically recommend to clients, because these are the ones that are tried, true, tested, the ones that are most used within practice. And there are obviously other little peripheral apps that sit around the edge. So like there's no AI tools on here. We strongly encourage the use of AI tools where they're relevant for you. So for the likes of Vinyl or Fireflow's fireflies. Sorry, I can't speak. Fireflies. If you do lots of online meetings with clients, that's a no-brainer. Get one of them involved, like we have them in ours, for example. We haven't got your self-managed super fund apps on here because that seems to be one of those things that they're kind of already done and dusted. Like most firms have already picked a side in relation to that, if you get where I'm going with this, okay? So on there, that's featured basically, our recommendation is using Zero Ledger's financial reporting. There are other options out there, but we just know that these are tried and tested and they connect and they have the most efficiency gains. Active Ledger is an option if you want a cloud-based one. There are some limitations around and the financial reporting. I have heard mixed feedback around that one. That's not to say that it's better or worse. I've just heard different people's opinions on Active Ledger. I am a big fan of Zero Ledger based on the way that it obviously connects in with all the other apps in the ecosystem. But equally, as accountants, you will have personal preferences on that. So you do you, boo, would be where I would say in relation to that one. In relation to practice management, there are options here. Ours is XPM, but obviously FYI is a player in the market in that space at the moment. There's obviously Cloud Connect for the much larger firms as well, FYI Elite, Carbon, they're your other ones that are out there. There are pros and cons to why I would pick and choose depending on what you needed and what your needs were. Document management, FYI and Suite Files. Signing solution, Anitra and FuseSign would be there. CorpSec, now Infinity CAS. ATO correspondence would be ATO SmartDocs, ATO Mate. Workflow management. Whilst I have three there, you've got XPM, you've got a good old-fashioned Excel spreadsheet, and you've got Account Kit. I'd also throw in the mix there FYI because that's what, FYI does it too. Client engagement, seamless content snare ignition. Work papers, where do I begin with work papers? Zero and or active work papers are my two picks, but there are at least a dozen online platforms out there that could be a possibility for you and your firm. I would suggest, though, that from a work paper perspective, understand that every firm is different, which is why there are so many out there. And I just want to remind you that there is a lot of time spent and or wasted on work papers when it's not actually something that a client ever sees. So just bear that in mind. Yes, it's still a necessity, but equally, just bear in mind how much time people do spend on them. Then the final one is just Practice Protect that we do, that we also recommend. New Change GPS work papers are really good. Interesting. I'd be, are they still an Excel spreadsheet though, Jenny, would be my question to you. Yes. Now, there was one other question, Andrew. You said, do I have a view on what percentage of revenue an accounting firm should spend on their app stack? Nope. Sorry about that one. I don't. I think what you need to weigh up is the efficiency gains that you get. So is the amount of money that you spend on your tech and the efficiency gains that you get from it, is it still, is there ROI on it? Your options are, I either spend money on tech and this is allowing me to scale, or I spend money on a human being to do that thing that tech is replacing. So that's the way that I would be weighing that up. I don't know what percentage they should be spending on it because it does change. And I think that it's an ever evolving landscape, because just when I think that the standard tech stack is there, then a new app comes along and I'm like, woo, that's cool. That's going to solve a problem. So I'm probably the worst person to ask on that one. Sorry about that. So they are Excel with a zero integration. Okay. Interesting. They're still Excel. Look, again, I think it's something to consider in the space of Change GPS. They're also owned by Access Group. There are people who have opinions about that whole ecosystem and space at the moment as well. So ultimately, my final word on work papers is, as I say, clients never see them. So just remember how much time you should or shouldn't be spending on the usage of your work papers. All right. Feel free to chuck any more questions and or comments in the chat. The final things that I would obviously want to leave you guys with is processes. Ultimately, the best way to scale your firm and to integrate the use of an offshore team is to make sure that your processes are clear and concise. Clarity Street has recently adopted probably one of the best apps that we've found recently, and it's an app called Scribe. So for every team or every firm that's on this call that is either using offshore team members or considering it, I would strongly encourage the use of Scribe because it's a bit of a game changer in relation to processes. Click, takes it, copies your screen, takes screenshots of what you're clicking on. It then dumps that into a process. You can edit that process if it hasn't quite captured what you're saying. You can send the link. You can then go back and just change that process, or you can redo the next process. It's not your old-fashioned Word document, things like that. It's actually a really cool piece of software. If you don't want to subscribe to another piece of software like Scribe, then if you're already using Loom, a Loom video with your AI, if you're using one of your AI note takers, do a recording because then you can get the transcription as well. That's what I'd be recommending. But I cannot stress to you enough, processes when it comes to having, not just offshore team, any team. Get what's up here in your brains out and into a process, and that is how you will effectively and successfully scale your business so that if somebody is actually following the process, then there should be no issues. But if they haven't followed the process, well, you've got a reference point again. I think that's all I've got for you guys. So if anybody wants to hear more, feel free to get in touch with us. But otherwise, you are welcome to obviously scan in that little QR code. Either send an email to info@Clarity Street. You can also send an email to Amy at Clarity Street if you'd really like. But otherwise, feel free to scan that little QR code and book in a meeting with us. We're always happy to have a further conversation with you about where you're currently at, especially for firms that are in the process of looking at their current tech stacks, thinking about moving, if they're using, if you're still using APS or MYOB and you're thinking about, moving to a different landscape, more of a cloud-based tech stack. What does that look like? What's the process? We can, obligation free, happy to have a chat with you. For those that have also got tech and you're sitting there going, it's just not working the way that I want it to, we're also here to help you in relation to this. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening in. As always, it's been a pleasure joining you today. Go back and have an extra 10 minutes in your day. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Amy. Very insightful. Thanks a lot.
No worries at all. Thanks, Normal. Really appreciate the team having us today. And yeah, all the best.
Thank you. Thank you all
See you
for
later.
joining us.